and to all the parents and parents-to-be. Nikki Bush with us in studio, and this time talking about the importance of repetition and learning.
Our brains learn through repetition. When we do an action over and over again, we get good at it, or we can remember facts a little bit better. Well, this morning, we're going to chat to our creative parenting expert, Nikki Bush, about how important repetition is in child development. Nikki, you said before we started this segment that I was going to love this, and I'm already embracing it because we're talking about neural pathways. What is going on in the brain when we say that repetition is the start of perfecting something? What is actually happening when we form those neural pathways?
Well, Graham, what happens in the brain is there's this magical fatty substance called myelin. And myelin gets laid down on a neural pathway. The more it's used, the more myelin gets laid down. So that means it's kind of well-oiled and greased. And then the electricity in the brain can move quicker, faster and more efficiently when a child does a movement. So, for example, if you were learning a kata in karate, you know, the first time you watch your child do these things, or when they're learning how to serve in tennis, it's awkward. It's very funny because it's very stilted and everything's disjointed. But the more they do it, and you were saying earlier, like 2,000 repetitions of a kata to get it right.
Okay. To become proficient in those movements.
And what actually happens in a child's brain is that to perfect any movement, to get it to a state of, you know, it looks pretty good, 200 to 300 repetitions is required of anything, absolutely anything. When a baby's crawling, 50,000 crawling movements are required to master crawling. And at the same time, it's not just the body movement, but it's integrating the left and right sides of the brain.
I can actually see that where he hits like a mental cul-de-sac little jacket. And then he'll just suddenly stop and sit up. And I could just see the brain is like rethinking, reworking, and then he's back, Speedy Gonzalez, off again. Now, I'm glad you mentioned a toddler with young children, with babies. You know, as much as I love That's Not My Meerkat, I've now read it 3,452 times. I don't even have to look down at the page. That's not my meerkat. His ears are too floppy. But Jack absolutely loves it. And he's not even at an age where he's really taking cognizance of it. But there's something about going through that pattern over and over. Why do they love watching the same program over and over? Why do they love reading the same book over and over? What is it about repetition?
So I know it kills the parents. But there's a sense of predictability and mastery that comes through this repetition of the same story or watching the same DVD, because they kind of get to know what's going to happen next. That predictability makes me feel safe, secure, in control, and I'm so clever.
I know what's going on.
And going back to the story thing, also remember that there's not just the words you're using, but the way you tell that story. And you'll find that when he can read that story for himself, his intonation will probably be exactly the same as yours.
He's going to have to try pretty hard. I get stuck into you. That's not my meerkat. I won't lie. Now, let's take it a step further when we start dealing with sports, especially with younger kids, because often it's the talent that identifies the drive or informs the drive then to put more effort in there. We identify a talent in. With sports, is it more important to have talent or more practice? Which will win out?
So it was Gary Player who said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And it was Malcolm Gladwell in that book, Outliers, that very controversial book, who talked about the 10,000-hour rule. And they did a whole lot of research into talented kids versus kids who just had grit, determination, and perseverance. You know, who were just prepared to go that extra mile, do the 10 extra minutes over and above what everybody else was doing, or the 10,000 hours instead of the 1,000 hours that everyone else was doing, that set them apart. Because it's exactly the same thing. The more you practice, the more myelinated that neurological pathway is, the more proficient and efficient it gets.
Oh, I love that. Well, we're going to continue on that life path and deal with parents and our expectations of our children and what kind of path we need to walk with them together. But you can start practicing already. Start trying something over and over. Maybe use a shoelace. I'm going to get Nikki to tie a shoelace after this as well. But very interesting conversation. We are talking about those neural pathways and why repetition is so important in our child's development.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Nikki Bush is with us in studio again to talk about the importance of understanding the link between repetition and learning.
Earlier, we started talking about the importance of parents understanding the link between repetition and learning for their kids. We're continuing that conversation right now with our creative parenting expert, Nikki Bush. For the sake of repetition, we're going to drum in some of those facts again. It is so important. Why is repetition vital when it comes to learning?
So this is the way that children learn, Graham. It's a little bit like the first time you walk up an overgrown hill, there's no pathway. And if you take a panga and you cut yourself a path and you walk that path 50 times or 100 times, suddenly a path will appear. It's exactly the same when a child is learning something new. There is no pathway. And they have to create the pathway through use, through doing something over and over and over again. And to create an engram or a memory cell in the brain, 200 to 300 repetitions of the same movement are required.
So I think where this really comes to bear, continuing on from, yes, we know toddlers love learning and all that's tied to repetition in that phase of life, when they enter into the school kind of framework, homework essentially is homework not that repeating of the lessons learned during the day?
It definitely is, especially in those early years where children are learning to do writing, cursive, printing, numbers,
Counting,
letters,
colour,
all of that, it's over and over again. And teachers tell me that they can absolutely see the children who have gone home with their 5 spelling words for the day and their parents have sat with them for 5 or 10 minutes and they've gone over those 5 words and then it becomes 10 words. And you give your children a serious advantage if you do that practice and that repetition.
You want your child to excel. You want your child to be the quickest developing, brightest spark there is. Is there a danger of us moving too fast and not getting the repetition in because we have this expectation of our children being spectacular from the beginning?
You've hit the nail on the head. And I see this all the time. It's probably the number one thing at the moment that schools are complaining about, is that parents are expecting from preschool right through to the end of primary school that their children must be A students. From the beginning, they must be getting straight A's. And you know what? We need to give children time. They take time to develop. They have their own developmental timetable. And it's okay to be average for a while you're learning to master something. Because you have to learn the parts of a movement, whether it's writing or serving in tennis. You've got to learn all the bits, the parts, and then be able to put them all together to create a fluid movement.
But you're doing them a disservice in the fact that later in life, not everything is going to come easy. You're constantly going to have new situations. We've spoken about life skills before and how important it is to develop those problem-solving capabilities. If you're always starting at number 99, you're missing out on that journey, which is the most important part.
Little steps in between that build the confidence. And so if we just take our shoelace story, to teach a child to tie shoelaces is a problem to be solved. And it's all about fine motor coordination, crossing the midline, motor planning the movement in my brain and then executing it. To teach a child to tie shoelaces does not happen once or twice. It takes
200
hundreds
to
of
300
attempts
times.
to get it right. And they're not going to always get it right, and there'll be a great deal of frustration in the process. But you've got to persevere.
I love that. So now, obviously, where it does become very frustrating and very real for a parent is in the case of therapy. Do we see repetition being used in the same way when it comes to therapy, occupational therapy, and just in general?
Absolutely. So earlier in the show, I said it takes 200 to 300 repetitions of the same movement to create that memory cell. When a child is sitting in therapy, occupational therapy, NDT, physiotherapy, they are fixing up the shortcuts in the brain and creating new neurological pathways. And that takes 2,000 to 3,000 repetitions to get that right.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Well, any other advice you want to leave with parents out there?
Give your children time. And don't get frustrated when they want to do something that you don't want to do over and over again. They actually want to get good at what they do. So give them the time and encourage the process. So important that they get to the other side believing I can, I am, I will.
Oh, well, I'm going to still treat it like an absolute mystery. It might not be my meerkat, okay, because his ears are too fluffy, but I'll be overjoyed when we do eventually find our meerkat. No, I love that. That's a book that I read with Jack every day, every single day before he goes to bed because he loves it. But thank you so much. This has given me a lot of hope and inspired me for the future. I think it's not about discovering that talent. It's about creating that talent within your child, and that you can do with every child out there.